Oops, not what I wanted to hit. Sorry, guys. Oh, Wade is here. Yay! And Michelle is here. Yay! Wow, some wonderful people here. Welcome, friends. We're going to wait a couple minutes to allow folks to all get into the virtual room. Oh, Mayor's is here too. There we go. We have some great activists in the room, Marie.
That's good. Then we can just do Q&A, right?
Well, I think everyone wants to hear your, real life on the ground experience, what you just had.
Yeah.
But I think many of these people that I'm seeing are people that are already passionate about
I think so.
the issue, which is encouraging.
So more singing with the choir than preaching to?
That sounds good.
Yes, I like that. I think we're just going to wait but 1 or 2 more minutes. Just give time for folks to log in. As you can hear, can you hear the ding ding when people come? Okay. Yeah, like people keep coming. So just occurred to me that I was going to reference, you can hear the ding, and then I thought maybe it's only on the host side. Maybe they think I'm hallucinating.
I can't hear the ding, so maybe you, the co people can, but
Yes.
not the group.
Melody, there's people that are waiting to get a in. All right, I'll do it. There. I let them in. Oh, now I gotta let them in. I'm gonna put this. I have a note to not forget to say stuff over on one side that I wanted to keep here, so it looks like I'm looking at you. But as soon as I click let the person in, the note goes away. It's like pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
So we have 2 Michelle Shermans.
I don't know who the other one
Hi,
is.
George. Hi, Sherry.
I
Pax Christi Little Rock is here.
Yay! Arkansas in the house. Okay, ready to start? Ready to start? Okay. Well, good. I think for most of you, I'm pretty sure that for most of us, it's evening. So good evening to everybody. And welcome to this second part of the presentation on what's really happening in Palestine. And it's really wonderful to see some new folks here, and also so many of the people that I know really care about the Palestinian-Israeli issue. That's exciting. It's good to have that level of concern all in this same virtual room. MPT, as you probably already know, most of you, has a vision of a just world grounded in the sacred interconnectedness of all life. And it's because of people like you coming and sharing this information with others after you leave here that make it possible. We did have somebody ask about if they wanted to make a donation. Melody will put the link in the chat box if you want to do that. So let me be not the first person ever, for sure, but maybe the first person in the last hour to introduce Marie Dennis as the senior advisor to the Secretary General of Pax Christi International and founder of the Ecumenical Center for New Creation, and the former director of Maryknoll Office for Global Concern, but also this year named Pax Christi USA's Teacher of Peace, which is the highest honor that they can give. That goes to someone who has lived and walked the talk for the vast majority of their life, which just completely describes Marie Dennis. For those of you who don't know her, if you ever get a chance to get to know her, take that opportunity because it's a true blessing. Marie is just coming back from Israel, Palestine, recently, I should say. And she was there for 10 days with meeting some of the movers and shakers on the ground, the people, the citizens, and organizations like the Arab Education Institute, the Ecumenical Accompaniment Program, Palestinian Conflict Transformation Center, and more. So she really was able to touch on all these bases of people who are on the ground and living it every day and what it's like for them. And so she's going to share with us her experiences, and also the cracks where the light may be coming through and where we can find hope. So it is my honor and privilege that I get to humbly present Marie Dennis.
Thanks, Mary. It's really nice to be with you all. And this was a challenging experience. I had been in Palestine and in the West Bank, in Gaza, in East Jerusalem, in Israel, quite a few times in the past. But thanks to COVID mostly, it had been a few years since I had been there. And this experience was really startlingly intense. It wasn't unfamiliar, but it was much more ominous, I think, than even what I had experienced before. And it was always challenging. So I was in Palestine with a solidarity delegation, a pilgrimage from Pax Christi International. As Mary said, we spent 10 days in both East Jerusalem and the West Bank. In the days we were there, we heard over and over again from Palestinians and also from Israelis the same devastating story of occupation, apartheid, shrinking space, and outrageous behavior on the part of the far-right Israeli government. Last week, Hawaida shared a compelling account of the Nakba, the history of occupation over the past 75 years, and the reality of Palestinian life now in East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza. Our delegation was able to see firsthand some of what Hawaida described in East Jerusalem and in the West Bank. We were unable to visit Gaza, as many of you know, and as Hawaida described very clearly, Gaza is literally a prison for 2 million people, with all of the air and sea and land entry and exit points intensely controlled. So we were not able to get to Gaza. We saw recently demolished houses, and we heard many stories of people trying to hold on to their homes and their land. We saw many places where the Israeli wall separated families from their land and from each other, children from their schools, people from their olive trees, and on and on. We saw the shocking new infrastructure of tunnels, huge bridges, and highways that exclude Palestinians but connect settlements to Jerusalem. I want to just begin. What I'll try to do is to just share with you some of the people we met and some of the experiences that we had. So I want to start with a time that we spent with Shireen Abu Akleh's family. Early in our visit, we had the honor of meeting several of Shireen's family members. As you know, Shireen was killed, assassinated on May 11th, just a year ago. She was a very well-known US American Palestinian journalist who had worked for Al Jazeera for 25 years. Her family said she was always very careful to wear her press jacket and her helmet to make sure that she was clearly identifiable as press. She was shot 16 times, and there is just no way that that was a mistake. She was clearly targeted, assassinated as a lesson for others. Shireen's family has been dedicated to insisting that both Israel, but that also the rest of the world, do the kind of necessary investigation to identify who was responsible for her killing and to hold them to account. And largely, the response has been silence. They've said that the State Department investigation was a cover-up. The Israeli government began by saying it wasn't one of their forces. And then a little bit later, well, it was, they thought, but it must have been a mistake. So far, no one has been held to account. And so I wanted to just begin in the manner of Latin American memorials by saying, Shireen Abu Akleh presente. So we began our journey in East Jerusalem. We spent time on the first day we were there with Danny Siderman, a Jewish lawyer whose attention to the situation in Jerusalem has been intense and is really fascinating. He said that since 1967, Israel has tried to maintain an Israeli sector in East Jerusalem and to prevent Palestinians from building there with any kind of legal permits. In 1967, at the time of the Six-Day War, there were 70,000 Palestinians in East Jerusalem. Now there are 380,000. There are two kinds of settlements in East Jerusalem, Israeli settlements. There are large settlements on confiscated land. I think that he said there were 228,000 Israelis in 10 different neighborhoods in East Jerusalem. And then there are also settlement enclaves that are inside, not alongside Palestinian neighborhoods. And there are about 2,800 of those in all in East Jerusalem. So we spent time in East Jerusalem, beginning in Sheikh Jarrah, a neighborhood, a neighborhood of Palestinians in East Jerusalem who have been constantly facing demolition orders for their houses. The claim by the Israeli government here and across the West Bank is that Palestinians built or rebuilt or repaired their houses without permits, but permits are impossible to get. And so the process is clearly one of pushing the Palestinians off their land, off their property. The Israelis are actually trying to change the reality on the ground also by building big hotels and office buildings in, for example, in Sheikh Jarrah, right on top of, right next to a neighborhood that is Palestinian. And there are also security cameras absolutely everywhere. The Israeli police in Sheikh Jarrah and elsewhere in East Jerusalem protect settlers, but not the Palestinians. Last year, there was an account, we were told an account of having 70 settlers come into the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah with sticks and stones and guns and gas tubes right after 5 police vehicles had left. And so I just want to read a short part of a poem recently written about Sheikh Jarrah, in Sheikh Jarrah. They do it in the middle of the night, on dark nights, quietly, stealthily, in large groups, well-organized militias, armed and all. A crowd of about 80 religious settlers bussed in from Hebron, came in the night to 2 houses in Israeli-annexed Arab East Jerusalem, Sheikh Jarrah, over the Green Line. They threw a child out of the broken window they'd entered by, a 2-year-old flying baby, falling from the 2nd-story window 5 meters high, ending up in the hospital, traumatized. They hit a man so badly, he was driven away unconscious in an ambulance. I saw him go. 3 others were also hospitalized, and the poem continues. Palestinians can be killed and no one cares, but Palestinians resist there and in so many other places by staying, by sumud, by steadfastness. Another neighborhood that we visited in East Jerusalem was Silwan. Silwan is very close to the old city, so the Israelis want the land to build parks and cable cars. They want to demolish the El Bustan neighborhood in Silwan for King David's garden. In Silwan, the picture of the mural on the house is striking because it was one of many other pieces of art on the buildings in Silwan, including beautiful pictures of eyes, the message being, we are watching, we see what's happening here. About 100 settlers live in Silwan now. You can see in this picture, this is from Silwan, looking at the old city of Jerusalem. About 100 settlers live in Silwan now. The Palestinians created there, for example, the Madad Creative Center in Silwan as a safe place for their children because their children were being consistently threatened and harassed by the settlers. One man in Silwan tried for 20 years to get a permit to build an apartment on his property for Palestinians. He finally gave up and built the building anyway with 5 apartments, but it was demolished. Now he and his family live in a tent on the land. On May 17th, just a few days ago, Israeli forces demolished a residential building in the Wadi Kadum neighborhood in Silwan. Next slide, please. The building, which was demolished by the occupation forces under the pretext that it was built without a permit again, housed 50 people from one family. You can see in this picture the Israeli flags indicating the presence of settlers in the middle of the neighborhoods that are Palestinian neighborhoods. In one of the East Jerusalem neighborhoods, we were told that one family had applied for years for a permit to repair their house, which they were never able to get. And they then discovered that an Israeli family had been given a permit to build on their property when they left. It's craziness. So from East Jerusalem, we went to Ramallah, where we spent time, had the privilege of meeting with representatives of 4 of the organizations that were declared as terrorist organizations in 2021 by Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz. These organizations are Adamir, Al-Haq, Defense of Children, International Palestine, the Union of Agricultural Work Committees, the Bisan Center for Research and Development, and the Union of Palestinian Women Committees. They work with Palestinian women and girls, children, peasant families, prisoners, civil society activists, and on, all of whom face increased levels of discrimination, even violence, because of this designation of these organizations as terrorist organizations. Israel has raided all of their offices, but they are all still working. They're also all in Area A, which is the Palestinian-controlled area, which was an insult to the Palestinian Authority. Diplomats have asked repeatedly for evidence that the groups were terrorists, but have received none. And the consequences for their ability to continue their work, their normal work, supporting and protecting human rights, are very significant. They say that since the Oslo Accords, 48 Palestinian civil society organizations have been closed. This is not, they said to us, this is not a conflict. This is an occupation. The two sides are not equal. Palestine, they said also, is a test for international values and laws. The international community has failed to push back. They told us, they reminded us that in many ways, BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, a nonviolent strategy, is considered more dangerous than an Iranian atomic bomb. That's what they told us. They asked us specifically to use the language of apartheid when we were talking about the situation of the Palestinian people, and we are committed to doing that. The effort to displace the Palestinians is striking. We saw, for example, a large apartment building in Kalendia that was completely demolished. There was a pool in the basement. It had been obviously a living place. There was a stroller that was just demolished along with the building. Residential structures, homes, certain parts of homes, apartment buildings, they may be inhabited, in which case their demolition typically results in displacement, or uninhabited. For example, if they're under construction. Livelihood structures like shops, animal shelters, walls, warehouses, and more. Structures that are part of infrastructure like water pipes, roads, network facilities, among others, are all subject to demolition. And it was almost everywhere that we went in East Jerusalem and the West Bank that people were living under that threat. A few words about the Christian churches, the situation of the churches in East Jerusalem and in the West Bank, but particularly in East Jerusalem. Since the election of the very far right-wing Israeli government, the Christian community in East Jerusalem has come under much increased attack, harassment of clergy, and vandalism. The beginning of the year, 30 Christian graves at the Protestant Mount Zion Cemetery were desecrated. In the Armenian quarter and the Old City, vandals spray painted "Death to Arabs, Christians, and Armenians" on the wall. And according to Danny Siderman, again, faith-based violence is increasing, and there is an ascendance of faith movements that are weaponizing religion, and he was very worried about that. He said, "We're on the brink of religious wars, intercommunal skirmishing, a repeat of 1948. A plan has been made," and I heard Danny talk about this a couple of times, "by the Israelis to take over the Mount of Olives, transforming Christian sites there into a national park." He's talked with Nancy Pelosi and the Vatican Secretary of State and others trying to raise alarms about this. We had the privilege of meeting with retired Patriarch Michel Sabat, who was the former president of Pax Christi International, a beautiful human being that you probably all know. He said, "Palestinians are weak, but we have our own power of resistance, even as the Israelis live in fear and insecurity." And he said, yes, this is clearly apartheid. He also, one of my particular interests, because of my own connection to Pax Christi's Catholic Nonviolence Initiative, I was on this journey to listen carefully to reactions of different Palestinians in different circumstances to the possibility of remaining nonviolence, of using nonviolent tactics. And Patriarch Sabah said, yeah, he said that the Palestinian Authority is committed to nonviolence, but he said Hamas is not, and Hamas gets attention. So it's getting more and more difficult to discourage any use of violence. But he said, in reality, it's the Israeli violence that gives space to the potential for Palestinian violence, and I could see that clearly. We also had a meeting with Patriarch Pizzaballa, who said, for example, that the status quo, a very carefully negotiated agreement among the different religious communities in Jerusalem, in the Old City, the sacred sites in the Old City, that the status quo is no longer being respected. He also said he wasn't so sure that he found it difficult to talk about nonviolence at a macro level with Palestinians, because they said dialogue with the Palestinian Authority has done no good. And again, Hamas has gotten attention and they've been more violent. He said there's a huge lack of trust, but that it may be important to think about nonviolence that is closer to people's lives. And I think that's true, helping people to deal with domestic violence, with violence in their families and neighborhoods. He thought perhaps it would be an important topic to raise with Catholic schools. That's his particular perspective. Another very impactful set of visits that we were privileged to have were with Bedouin communities, where once again, the story was of more expulsions and demolitions. As you know, the Bedouins are nomads in Palestine between Jerusalem and Jericho. Their situation is dire and underreported. According to OCHA, there are 48 communities in the central West Bank alone that are under threat of eviction, Bedouin communities. The Bedouins sometimes work in the settlements and sometimes join the army, and which sometimes puts them in a very awkward kind of place in relation to other Palestinians, but they are extremely poor, usually without electricity unless they have some solar panels or water from the state. Neither Palestinian nor Israeli ambulances will come to the Bedouin communities in an emergency. They also have no right to education, although they do have some schools, although many of their schools are threatened with demolition. They're prevented in general from living their own culture. Yet we had the privilege of visiting two different Jahalin Bedouin communities. This was in the first, their tents were built of scrap wood and recycled material, but the inside of their tents were lined with beautiful rugs and fabric. They were extremely hospitable, gave us a wonderful meal, and we had a really lovely visit. But the reality is that where they used to have many goats, they now have very few. They've experienced overwhelming harassment from the military. I saw one group of young people, a small group of young people who were herding sheep on the hillside near the Bedouin community. And I had not ever seen this before, but they were herding the sheep. They were controlling the sheep by throwing stones on the ground. As you know, this geography has a million stones, and it was a very natural way for them to hold the animals in a particular place. It was very interesting to see that, and it made sense for me of why young people often have an instinct to throw stones as their form of protection. We also visited a different Bedouin community where, again, the situation was threatened eviction, threatened demolition. In this community, they had a school, but the school. Next slide, please. This was the school, and the Israelis had built wastewater pipes from the settlements to go right by this Bedouin community, and right next to the school, to a classroom in the school, they regularly open a vent in the wastewater pipes that emits a really offensive odor. They said it was just a frustrating and infuriating kind of practice. In a press release just today, the Norwegian Refugee Council announced that over 6,550 Palestinian students face life without an education unless Israel cancels the demolition orders for 57 schools in the occupied West Bank. Another striking feature that was visible everywhere was the already demolished buildings. I mentioned the one apartment building that we saw, but I'm sure you have seen pictures of Israeli tractors and front-end loaders and shovels simply breaking into homes and buildings and the kind of infrastructure that I talked about before. There was a story today about a very large home south of Hebron that was demolished yesterday, just one after another. This was an interesting picture of something that was also much more striking this time than it had been 3 or 4 years ago when I was there. And that was the sort of massive infrastructure of roads and tunnels and bridges that facilitate life for the settlers, as I said before, that connect settlements to Jerusalem or with each other, but that cannot be used by the Palestinians, as I'm sure you know, and that often just cut right across Palestinian lands, which leads to the whole reality of the separation wall. This was the sister. We visited their convent in Bethany, right near Jerusalem, where they have a daycare center, a school for very young children. And as the wall was built, it was built right next to the sisters' convent, which cut them off from the neighborhood where both some of the sisters lived, but also from where most of the children who went to their school lived. So the journey that used to be across the backyard from the neighborhood of where the children lived to their school is now a journey of 17 kilometers. So many children don't go to the school. The scene on the roof of the school where the children have a playground is also striking because it's right up against the wall. And you can see, I think in the next slide, where the sisters decided that the wall was so offensive that they would try to make it look better for the children by decorating it with art, which they did. So on the other side of that wall was the neighborhood where most of the children live, where some of the sisters have lived. And the door, for a while, there was a gate in the wall, and the parents would pass their children. It's not this gate, but it was a gate where they could open the top of it and pass the children over the bottom half of the gate to school, and that then got closed permanently. In another area that was likewise very close to Bethlehem, in the Cremason Valley, we visited another school that is surrounded also by the wall, and where there is a constant threat that the Israelis are going to close the wall completely. Thanks to demonstrations over several years, the wall has not been closed, even though there's been a threat for 10 years. If it is closed, the school will be cut off from Beit Jalah, from Bethlehem, where their students come from. The school serves Palestinians, mostly Muslims, the poorest children, and they will not be able to get to the school if the wall is closed there. This gate, this image is of another part of the wall. It's interesting that the separation wall is, in many places, it's an enormous, very high cement wall. I don't know how high it is, 15 feet high, very high. But in other places like here, the wall is wire and chain link. If in some places, the Israelis want to be able to see through the wall, and this wall is also much more easily moved. So it was interesting to see a different view of a wall. This gate is in Walaja, right near Bethlehem, where this is the only way that one family can access their house, and for which they have legal ownership papers. They said that only the father in an interview said that people are afraid to visit them because there are always soldiers around their house, and that one person in the family has to remain at home all the time to lock and unlock the gate. So he said when he was speaking yesterday was his wife's sister's wedding, and their oldest child had to stay at home. So he said it's like living in a prison. This picture is of the one that was up before. Can you just go back one? Yeah, that's a picture in Al Walaja. It's a women's cooperative that, in spite of the reality of restrictions, of not being able to move around easily, of the separation wall and the problems that they have with permits, the threat of demolitions all the time, a group of women, 7 women in 2016 decided that they were going to both upcycle trash to create gardens and a safe place in the village. So they did, and within a couple of years, they had built 19 gardens. Then they decided to learn how to use woodworking machines, which they learned to do. And they are now creating wood products and other items that they're able to sell. They've written quite a lovely book called Sumud, Existence is Resistance, which is about their effort. The women have been able to sustain their families, to clean up the environment, and to change the image of women in their village. Thank you. So this is an image of the Arab Education Institute. They have regular sessions with Palestinian women who come to the center to have a safe space to tell their stories, and they have said over and over the power of that experience. They call the Women's House the Sumud Story House, which just is there to offer women an opportunity to tell their stories. And they say that very often the women will tell their stories more than once in order to get through the whole story. The Arab Education Center also is responsible. They created what's called the Wall Information Center, or the Wall Museum, on which they have placed, you can't see them very well in this picture. This is a great picture of the wall, but all along the wall near the Arab Education Center and Rachel's tomb, they have placed on the wall large placards that contain the stories, mostly of women, but not entirely of women, that is their experience of occupation. It's a really powerful experience to walk around the wall and to read these stories. The Arab Education Center also has a number of programs for youth and has been present there for a very long time. We also visited an organization some of you may know well called WIAM. Zugbi is their director, founder. And it is a Palestinian center committed to active nonviolence, to nonviolent action. Zubi talked about that the struggle, the nonviolent struggle ahead of us, was a struggle for which each of us needs to play a part, that Palestinians need to continue to struggle to end the occupation, that the Israeli peace camp needs to act to stop the occupation, and the international community needs to act to bring Israel to its senses, not to their knees. Very powerful program at WIAM that is committed to teaching nonviolent action. After we spent time in Bethlehem, we did go to Hebron. Hebron is the images, the experience of being in Hebron is incredibly powerful. Excuse me. This street used to be the main market street for the Palestinian community in Hebron. It's now deserted. The Palestinians who live in Hebron are constantly threatened by settlers who live in Hebron. They're extremely restricted in their ability to move. And the situation in Hebron is I think as serious as it is anywhere in the West Bank. The experience of being in Hebron this time was a little bit, it was unusual because there was so much movement of the Israeli settlers in Hebron going into and out of businesses and places of worship. And it was, I don't know, just kind of an eerie experience to see the desertedness of the main streets that were Palestinian streets of commerce. I think one of the most interesting and courageous people we met in Hebron was Isa Amro, who works with Youth Against the Settlements. Again, an organization committed to nonviolence that has been both active and very threatened by settlers active against the occupation, against the restrictions in Hebron, and so on. Right after we visited with Isa, he sent out the Facebook post that he had been arrested and beaten, and it's just a constant part of his life. He had sent another message that described a group of Israeli settler women who were threatening his center, and it's just a constant reality. So in Hebron, the community peacemaker teams and the Ecumenical Accompaniment Project in Palestine and Israel are both present and active. There were we met with a few of both EAPPI and CPT. I was struck by the fact that the community peacemaker teams were very young Palestinians who were responsible for their presence in Hebron. It was very, very courageous. We also spent some time, and I'm going to just have a little bit more so that we can have some time for some questions and discussion. We had a very interesting conversation with Hamed Kouasmi, who works for the UN High Commission on Human Rights, tracking and reporting on human rights violations, both by Palestinians, especially in prisons, but as well as especially by the Israelis. His job is to follow every detail of what happens on the ground with the aim of accountability, and the information goes into a database. But Israel is now making it very difficult for UNHCR staff to enter the country after the United Nations produced a database of companies that deal with the settlements. He said over and over again how important it is for internationals to be present on the West Bank. He said that during COVID, when there was not much international presence on the West Bank, many of the Israeli plans that had been made years ago were implemented, and he just couldn't have emphasized that more strongly. We also did spend time in the south of Hebron, where threats continue, have been constant and continue in Masafer Yatta, which is was named a closed firing zone in the 1980s for the purposes of military training, but has been the homeland, the places where over 1,000 Palestinians live in 12 or so villages that are constantly being threatened with displacement, or actually displaced, or threatened with demolition of their houses. And there were more demolitions in the last few days in this area. Also, illegal settlers, Israeli settlers, often carry out attacks against the residents, and they say that some number of people in Masafer Yatta are actually rebuilding caves in which their ancestors used to live and are planning to return to live in the caves. There is talk of a new Nakba, and it really feels that way. The stories of heartbreak in one village, one home after another, are not old stories, but they are ongoing. We heard so much frustration that the world, especially the United States, has ignored the occupation of Palestine for decades. We heard again and again specific details about the deliberate, horrific exclusion of the Palestinian people that has to be clearly identified as carefully orchestrated apartheid. That is not anti-Semitic, they said. It's just the truth. And that people will understand apartheid better than they understand occupation. But people stay. They call their steadfastness sumud, an expression of nonviolence resistance that was extremely inspiring to me. I had many conversations, I said, about nonviolence with Palestinians, trying to understand what role, if any, nonviolence has or can have in the struggle against the violence of occupation. The resistance of the Palestinian people is powerful, pervasive, and nonviolent. It is so frustrating that the Palestinian people are consistently labeled as terrorists. Nonviolence is a way of life at a personal, interpersonal, and communal level.
Hurts so bad.
It's powerful stories.
He said that they ironed your skin.
Burned it like laser. Burned it with something that just.
Pardon me?
No.
Could we ask everybody to mute, please, while Marie is finishing up?
I'm almost finished, and then would love questions and comments. The resistance of the Palestinian is really powerful and pervasive and nonviolent. As I said, it's a way of life at a personal, interpersonal, and communal level. It is powerful stories of resistance permanently posted on the separation wall, strikes and demonstrations, gardens and music, prayer and public witness. It is the BDS, the proposal for BDS, for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. It's accompaniment and solidarity. It's restorative justice. It's advocacy. It was in Gaza particularly, it was job creation successfully. It's gardens and woodworking like the women were doing. It's education, citizenship, diversity, interreligious understanding. It's responses to domestic violence. It's sumud. It's staying put. What we witnessed was nothing short of heartbreaking, we said at the end of our delegation. as I described families living in daily fear that their homes would be demolished at a moment's notice for lack of a building permit, which is rarely approved by the Israeli authorities. It's farmers who must choose between tending their animals and their crops or being violently attacked by settlers. It's human rights activists and Bedouin communities and on who tell stories of grief and dispossession, of land confiscation and imprisonment. What we witnessed was nothing short of an unfolding, deliberate plan to disenfranchise one group of people for the benefit of another. We saw the ever-expanding illegal Jewish settlements and the network of separate highways, bridges, and tunnels which support them. A modern infrastructure, as I said, solely designed for the use and benefit of Israeli citizens. But what we saw was also nothing short of amazing. Caring teachers who transform rooms and playgrounds into places of safety and joy. Children who, like all children, delight in sharing what they're learning. Women who refuse to be overtaken by the situation, and on and on and on. And we came to fully appreciate the phrase, "to exist is to resist," which was on the wall in the place where we met the representatives of the organizations that had been designated as terrorist organizations. How the mere act of going on with one's everyday activities is a powerful form of nonviolent resistance. Our witness of sumud, a word that has come to define Palestinian refusal to give up and their steadfast determination to build on what is rightfully theirs, was humbling and inspiring. I left with firmly fixed in my mind the reality that a new Nakba is very possible, a commitment to talk about the reality there as apartheid, and to encourage others to please visit Palestine. The presence of internationals who understand what's happening there and can retell the story is crucial, and that Palestinian people are nonviolent, far from being terrorists. So with that, let me stop and just invite your comments, corrections, questions. Thank you.
Marie, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. Friends, we would like any and all questions, within time constraints of not sending people to bed after midnight. You are more than welcome to use the response button at the bottom, or the reaction button, to raise your hand, or you can type into the chat box your name with the word stack, which means we will put you in the stack of folks who have a question to ask, and call on you as your names come up. But we would love to have you feel free to ask anything that you are curious about or want to know more information about.
I would also welcome, I can see that Hawaida is with us, and Abigail, who was also on this pilgrimage, is also with us. So I would welcome their additions, corrections. What more would you want to say about what was a really extraordinary experience and is hard to capture in a few words?
It's Abigail. As always, Marie, I think you did a superb job from what I just listened to. Unfortunately, I was late coming on, expressing what we saw and how difficult it was, but at the same time, inspiring to see people get up every morning and just do what they need to do, is truly a act of resistance. We saw, I think you may have mentioned that wall. To resist, to live is to resist.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a great
So
saying
thank
for
you.
all of us, isn't it? To live is to resist.
Mm-hmm. We had a question forwarded to us with the pushback that the Israelis have recently shown, Israeli citizens, in reaction to Netanyahu's sort of political attempts to garner more power under his own position. Do you think that this could have an impact on the Israeli population in general for them if they're starting to question Netanyahu, who's been so far right all this time? Do you think that will have an impact on their overall observation of how Palestinians in general are treated?
That's a really good question. Just as we were, while we were there, the major demonstrations began with the Israelis objecting to the restructuring of the Supreme Court. And I was asking the same question: is there an ability to look with new eyes at the reality of the Israeli government's behavior? And I didn't hear a lot of encouragement that was likely to happen. I don't know what others think, but I think some, there were here and there were some, but of course there are Jewish Israelis who are very committed to ending the occupation. But I think the broad population, I think, was pretty well focused on the situation of the Israeli governmental structures and not too much on the occupation. But one of the most hopeful things that I heard about was about Jewish Israelis who are accompanying Palestinian communities on the West Bank and in East Jerusalem as well. And to me, that is a tremendous sign of hope. And I think, and it's very courageous on their part.
Great. I see Abigail has her hand raised.
Just wanted to mention, because I know Marie was talking about the nonprofit organizations or NGOs that we met with. And I just wanted to alert you to the fact that the Knesset on Sunday, it is anticipated that they will create a law that from now on, any NGOs, non-governmental organizations that receive any kind of foreign aid will now be taxed 65% on that aid. That includes the UN, the EU, and any other charities. So it's a deliberate attempt to shut down, just as it was when they named them terrorist organizations. So that is just floating around today all over the news. It's just horrifying.
Thank you, Abigail. That is horrifying. It makes me think of the countries, including, I think it was Egypt, I know Russia, and a number of other countries, that if you receive any money from a foreign source, you have to identify yourself as a foreign agent as an organization, which is that could be down the road. There's a question from Manny and Mary Ryan Hotchkiss.
Yep.
Hi. We were not able to visit Bethlehem University. I do think that the university is a unique place. I think the students who go to the university constantly live with the challenge of movement from one place to another. I don't know offhand if the Bethlehem University itself is targeted in some particular way. Does anybody else know that?
They were closed for several years at one point during, I guess it was the Second Intifada. But there's a more and more attempt to criticize and to terrorize Christian and Catholic.
Yeah.
Well, let me say Christian churches, places, organizations, etc.
Yeah, I don't know how much, whether that specific harassment of Christian and Catholic centers has been predominantly in East Jerusalem or also in the West Bank. I mean, certainly it's been in Bethlehem in the past, but right now I'm not sure. Why
I
did
think-
you know?
I missed what was that last part?
I just wondered if Hoeda knew of whether the
Oh, mhm.
whether the Bethlehem University had been particularly harassed, but it's okay. Did we meet any of the Israeli groups trying to support Palestinians?
Mhm.
On this trip, we did not particularly. We met with, we began our visit with Danny Siderman, who is a Jewish lawyer who runs an organization that is very focused on what's happening in Jerusalem. But other organizations that I have met in the past, we didn't meet this time. It was just, I think, not enough time.
Marie, I saw in graffiti somewhere in the background, Handala. And it brought back to me all the things that symbolizes. And I wondered if it's still, I don't know if you could do a comparison, but is it still prolifically part of the graffiti? Has it stood the test of time? And if people want, I could put in the chat, like if they want all the background information on that character, but
That would be interesting, Mary. I don't know. Yeah.
yeah.
The separation wall is just one story after another. There was one place at the wall near one of the gates. You just go from one story to another. Phenomenal art. One of my favorite stories about Palestinian resistance is, and this is probably some years ago, was of right near the Arab Education Institute, which is a Pax Christi member organization. There was a symbolic bridging of the wall by having an orchestra play right up against the wall on the Bethlehem, on the Palestinian side, and another orchestra on the other side of the wall, able to play back and forth as a kind of symbolic bridging the wall. And people are amazingly creative.
Yeah, that's beautiful. We, when I was in Be'elin, a little village in the West Bank, every Friday, the Palestinian villagers who were watching this apartheid wall cut through their olive groves and confiscate their land, every Friday they'd meet after prayers, and always something new and creative and nonviolent. And one of the things they did is one night they snuck into the reserves of the people building the wall and borrowed some stuff. And they literally took all the materials that were being used to build the wall and sculpted them into a very, very long bridge that rested on their shoulders. And they said to build bridges, not walls.
That's great. That's great. Deb Hansen has a note in the chat that I think is really important. She said she had to leave and she was sorry. After being involved with a Jewish congregation for many years, I'm only now beginning to have an appreciation of the collective trauma of the Jewish people. The painful situation in Israel and Palestine reflects the violent forces sweeping through our world in these days. And I absolutely agree with that. I think that we have no idea the long reach of trauma that will plague our world forever, and unless we stop it. And I think that the hope that I see in really in Sumud, in Palestinians staying put and living life in spite of the occupation, in spite of the frustration, is it's very real. And I think it is one of the things that worried me the most on this trip was having a sense that some of the young people, the sort of youngest generation, not the children,
Mhm.
is feeling is just reaching a point of frustration and a boiling point, at which they're, I mean, as I think it was Patriarch Sabah said, it is the Israeli government's violence that is provoking the violence in response, and that would just be enormously tragic.
Yeah. And
Peter,
yeah,
yeah.
I see. I was just gonna say, I see Peter's got his hands up. Well, he did. Where'd you go, Peter?
Up there.
There,
Um, I was on several teams, over a dozen peace teams to the West Bank and Gaza since 1995. The violence was terrible back then in the 90s
yeah,
and the 2000s, but just getting the accounts firsthand, it's worse. How can the people survive? And you say, as you say, their resistance is there. They stay.
yeah.
They don't give up. They're obviously very wounded sisters and brothers
Yeah.
with the harassment and violence that's persistent over decades, and they hang in there.
They hang in there.
That's courage.
It is courage, Peter. It's so true. It is so true. One other question, somebody, Manny and Mary asked if there were any problems entering the airport in Israel. We were paid attention to what we were saying when we went through the airport. We didn't go in a big group. We got there kind of on our own. I think one or two people, maybe one person in our delegation had some more questions as she was leaving, but mostly it was not a problem. We did have some conversation maybe a week before we went about what was clearly escalating violence. It was around the time of some of the attacks on the Christian community in East Jerusalem. We knew demolitions were escalating and on, and there'd been killing that has continued in Nablus and Jericho and so on. But we all agreed that we were going to go anyway, and didn't have any problem and did not feel personally threatened. And I would just say again how important it is for us to go if we possibly can, and to encourage others to go. It was a little bit the point of this Pax Christi International delegation, was that each person on the delegation, or most people, are going to try to bring a group from their own country. They were from different countries. And that's what we've been asked to do. So.
And Israel wants tourists coming to visit.
Right.
That's a very important source of income. So
Yeah.
they want all kinds of people to come, but of course they try to hide the West Bank and Gaza violence.
I mean, I also think that it's really important, as you all know, to do what we can to encourage people going on a pilgrimage to encounter the reality of what's happening in Palestine. Too often, I think groups go and have a holy trip and never see the reality present. And so we did have an interesting conversation with a couple of groups that we happened to meet at the parish where we went to Mass on Sunday. I think it's worth encouraging people to really see the reality.
Yeah, exactly. Do we have any more questions? Okay, well,
Good.
I personally and collectively, I know, want to thank you, Marie, for sharing your insights, your knowledge, and your passion for this. I always feel like, I mean, you could read me a menu and it would be amazing, but the your insight and your scholarly attention to detail and your heart and your passion, it all comes through. And so I really want to thank you. We're so appreciative of you and of your time. As many of you know, MPT sends regular teams to the West Bank and to Gaza when we can get in. Our next team is being formed right now to go. And this would be a team to help do protective accompaniment of Palestinian farmers as they try to harvest their olive crops. So if you're interested in joining this team, we had an original end of applications being accepted as the 17th. It's been extended to the 30th or 31st, excuse me, of this month. So I will put that in the chat if you are interested.
The length of time is 3 to 5 weeks. The team determines the length of the team.
Yep. And if you're not able to join our team, but you do want to support the work, Melody will put that link in the chat. We want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. And as one last thing, if you would like to unmute yourselves so that Marie can hear the applause, I think that it is well earned.
Good.
Thank you all.
Thank
Great to be
you.
with you. Nice to see you all.
Thank you, Marie.
Thank you, Marie.
Thank you so
Bye.
much, Marie.
You.
Good to see you. Thanks.
Much
Thanks,
love.
Everybody have
Melody, Mary,
a
everybody.
great evening.
You
all right.
too. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.